Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Courtney Pollock, and I'm the Customer Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Acumatica Tips and Tricks, presented by Matthew Butler. So before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go over. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise to a minimum. However, throughout the webinar, you can submit any questions you have at any time. If you have a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar, and we're going to hold all those questions for the end of the presentation. In your GoToWebinar panel, you also have the option to zoom into the presentation if you're having any issues seeing a certain aspect of the screen. And then we're also going to be recording today's webinar, and it's going to be distributed tomorrow to all of you today with us, and as well as those who registered but were not able to attend. You can always find these recordings on our SWK YouTube channel. There's a wealth of information there. And then we'd also appreciate your participation in our closing survey. So with that said, we're thrilled that you've taken some time out of your day to be with us on this session. SWK is always here to help you fulfill your vision of a smarter and easier way to run your business by providing you tools, support, software, industry knowledge whenever you need it. So whether you're here to explore Acumatica as a new solution, or you are an Acumatica user and you're here to learn some of these awesome tips and tricks that Matthew has in store for us today, we really encourage you to ask any questions you have while we have an expert with us. And like I mentioned, we share these recordings on our YouTube channel. And you can also find us on other social media sites like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter/X, where we're always going to be sharing updates and different software tips and tricks on those channels. So that is enough from me. I'm going to hand it over to Matthew for the main event.
Thank you, Courtney. My name is Matt Butler. I am the Acumatica Consulting Advisor for SWK Technologies. I have been working with Acumatica a little over a decade now, and we're going to just go through a few of the things that I've learned make my life easier, and I'm hoping that they make your life easier too. So I'm going to start with some things with generic inquiries that not everyone might be aware of, and it's actually more than just generic inquiries. When you look at a grid in Acumatica, no matter what the grid is, 99.9% of the time, there is a way to get to what you want faster. And I'm going to go ahead and show you that. You're not going to see my keyboard, but I'm just going to hold down my Shift key and hit F. When I select a particular column, you can see that by hitting Shift F, I filtered immediately to what I was looking for. Now this works like a light switch. If I hit Shift F again, you can see that it undid what it was doing. So that's a very important way to speed up your users. Whenever you're trying to find something, the ability to hit Shift F on any grid really does make a huge difference in the speed at which you can gather information. And again, that's part of the Acumatica XRP framework. This is part of every screen where you see a grid. So important fact, and I thought it was worth noting because I run into a lot of folks that just didn't realize how quickly they could pull everything from a particular date, or and these do stack up. So if I want to look at everything for prod retail on the first, I can go ahead and just do it twice. And I challenge anyone to hit the drop downs and start typing faster than Shift F. Just showed me everything on the first for prod retail. So what we're going to get into first is generic inquiries and some of the other tips and tricks that I have found very I guess I found them very I found that people tend to get lost in looking for particular pieces of information that might be anomalies, things I need to look for. And part of that is the format, and the other part is maybe conditional format. And if you've used Excel, you know what I'm talking about. We'll get rid of these and we'll look at perhaps we'll look at, let's see, a particular dashboard element, and this is the late orders to ship. So these are my orders to ship, and if I look at this right now, I can see different colors, different things going on. Now I'm going to show you how we did that. So first, you can see that there are colors. And if you had Acumatica for a while, you didn't realize that you could go ahead and color code particular lines. Well, in more recent versions now, you can actually color code a specific piece of information, meaning at the cell level on my results, I can actually put a style to an exact data field. And as you look at this, you can see I have constructed a couple of examples. So if the request, and this is using a today. So basically, if it was requested before today, then it means it's late. And so we're going to construct this in its whole. I'm going to go ahead and say if, and then I want a particular field. In this case, I'm looking at the request date, but it doesn't have to be the request date. But we're looking at the request date, so I'm just going to go ahead and find my request date. And I find that by using my handy little search. And then we're going to go ahead and double click that. And now keep in mind, if you've ever used this before, you got to keep making sure that you don't highlight everything before you select something up here, because it has a tendency to replace all of the work you've been doing. So it's just a little tip. Always make sure that you're paying attention to what's going on down here. And so I'm going to go and find a date time, and here's an example. I went to look for a different function. It's highlighted everything. So now if I click today, it's going to replace everything. So let's just make sure we click off of that so it doesn't keep the highlight. And then I'm just going to double click today. And then if it's less than today, I want to go and get a style. And again, highlighting, but one click and we're good enough. So I'm going to make this, we want to make it maybe red or maybe bad, but we're going to go with red 20. So I'm going to double click red 20. And then part of formatting is also the lack of changing of formats. So in this case, default. So if this is true in my if statement, then we're going to make it red. Else, meaning anything that didn't mean true, we're going to make it default. And you know what? We had red before, so I'm going to make it a different color just so you can see it change. We're going to make it, let's say, orange. And so now that's orange. You'll notice that I like to put spaces between everything. Whenever I'm building in the editor, when everything runs together, I can't use control and arrow to move around without it jumping past everything I want to do. So I leave an extra space just so I can move about without jumping an entire line of code I was making. So little tidbit, another space, as you can see, little space here. So right here. So now when I hit control, I can move around very nicely. So I'm going to validate that. Always hit validate. And I'm going to say, okay. Now I'm going to save this. And then we're going to go ahead and when it's done, we're going to hit view inquiry. And we should see when it pops up the new inquiry that we have some oranges and some reds, and here you are. So here's the formatting. Now, if it was say today was 5/17, this would not be orange. So one of the other things that those folks that are familiar with moving out of like SL and some of the other platforms historically had like views, SQL views, and things like that. Well, one of the things that Acumatica did to sort that out for us is create the ability to create a generic inquiry that feeds yet another generic inquiry. And how that works is as such. I'm going to go ahead and find, I can't spell, but this was show me the money. So what I did was created just a completely independent generic inquiry, having nothing to do with shipments. We're going to get back to the shipments in a moment. And all it is uh, a summary, a sum of all of the doc balances or the invoice balances that is greater than 0, where the due date is less than today, meaning it's past due. And the reason I did that was because when I look at this, I can see that I'm late on a bunch of scheduled shipments. And you can see that I have this funny looking formula here. I haven't given it a caption because I want to show you that it will add my show me the money GI and then where the summary came from, which is the sum of all of my invoice balances. Now, if you've built GIs, you know that before you could feed a GI into another GI, constructing this would involve going to this grouping pane and having like 11 billion columns here to try and get it to sort it out. And you may not even be able to get it to sort out, giving you a good grouping because of the nature of the data that you are doing, right? So in this case, I'm just going to view the inquiry, and of course, this is the one I didn't restart. We'll restart it, and then we'll view the inquiry. And all it's going to show me is by customer, what is their past due balance in summary. Now, that's not the magic of any of this. The magic is that I can now use this, and I can use more than one of these in constructing a much more comprehensive view of data. What are my outstanding count of invoices? What's the max or the min date, et cetera, et cetera. And I can combine these. So you can see I have 50 customers that have some balance. Now, if I go over here and I look at the inquiry I was working on, and I go to my data sources, you can see that I'm simply adding a table, but it's not a table anymore. So when I come over here and look, I can see that if I look at all records and I say, just put in the word money, hopefully that pulls it up. Okay, so this is not a table. This is just another generic inquiry. Now, if I look at generic inquiries, take this out, I can now use my inquiries as tables in feeding other inquiries. And I'm not sure what the limit is from a practical perspective, but I can tell you that one of our consultants is on, I think, half a dozen in a very complex GI. And it simply would not have been possible without some pretty fancy footwork writing SQL views. Well, the problem with SQL views is it doesn't keep up with schema. And when Acumatica upgrades, you got to review those pieces of schema. It also, one of the problems with SQL views is it doesn't take parameters. So under the hood, it's grabbing all the data. So the bigger your instance gets, the more data you get. It's making bigger and bigger views under the hood to bring up to Acumatica and filling up memory before you even start filtering. Well, these are not like that. So we'll go back to how we used it. And I'm just going to get rid of this and make sure that we're not editing it. Okay. And all I did was take that same approach, and I left joined because, as you saw, there were 50 customers. They may or may not be one of the shipments that is late, but I'm looking at these orders that are supposed to have shipped, and I'm left joining the customer to that same view. Now, in the results, all I have to do then is the same as I would with any other table. I grab the table, grab the column. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and take this out for a moment, and we're going to show that because that steps into a really important aspect of writing GIs. So we're going to go ahead and hit View Inquiry. Okay, and what you see here is all of the balances based on the customer, and we can see Alt to Ace has the same balance over and over again. This particular one has a 0, so I may decide I'm going to use a function that just replaces null, which is why we see a blank with 0, so it's prettier. But you can see that we have taken two completely independent pieces of information, invoices and sales orders, and combined them in a summary fashion and a listed fashion without breaking a sweat, right? So one of the important things to note, and I'm going to give you an example of this, is let's just look for, okay, so here's a good one. So I'm looking at order total. And I'm asked frequently by customers and some consultants, how do I take my formula and get it formatted? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example to show you the power of the schema field. Now, some of you are more seasoned and understand this, but I'm going to explain it in total here. If I go ahead and take that same field, order total, and I'm going to go and find it, let's go to fields and then search. So I'm going to go to order total. And I'm going to simulate a little more complex, but we're going to make it so that it looks like a nice, make this equal to the order total, and we're going to multiply it times 1.00, and we're going to divide it by 1.00. So really, we're doing nothing, but it's going to show you what's going on here. So I'm going to get off of that, and then I'm going to click on the whole line. I'm going to drag it up so they're right next to one another. And what I'm going to do is first I'm going to show it to you without schema, and then I'm going to show it to you with schema, and then I'm going to explain what this really means. So if I go to View Inquiry now, those of you who have done this before and understand the plight of looking at nice formatted pretty data for counting of the users are going to, I guess I didn't use that. Okay, so ugly. Super ugly, way ugly, way ugly, ugly, right? So when we talk about schema, there's something called decorators on all fields in Acumatica. And those decorators are literally quite, if you're an end user, we'll just call them decorators because they really do decorate how things behave and look. It's a little more complicated for the developers or even the more technical consultants. But if you're a user, what you want to know is how it behaves, what it looks like. That's driven by the schema field. Now I'm going to show you something interesting. Let's see. What is a good other? Do we have another number? I'm going to call it curry control total. Now notice it has nothing to do with this. All this is applying as a decorator. In fact, I could add a table, not even use it. As long as I've added the table, it can use the schema field's behavior and it will apply it to this. Now, the one thing you'll note is the label, the caption is going to come from curry control total, but I'm going to show you how that works. And we're going to view the inquiry again. And what you're going to see now is that same field is now formatted and it's labeled. So I don't have to go to my captions. I don't have to do anything unless I'm really attempting to make something new. Now, because that's not actually control total, I'm just going to call it order total and pick order total, which is the same as this. And all of the behaviors and the mappings. So now I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. Now what you're going to see is the behavior of the field, the formatting of the field. All of that carries over with that schema dropdown, or it doesn't. So in this case, because I already have order total, I can tell you why I did this. It already has order total. So what it really needs now is a caption. I think I test this, but we're recording. Um, I think because we already have order total, it's not really liking the idea that I'm going to use it twice. But you could see that, let's try order total. This is just for science now. We'll see if that has any impact to it. It may or may not. Okay, so now that it's not in use twice, you can see that I've managed to duplicate order total, which kind of a no-no for this, but for the exercise, it shows you what's going on. Okay, so the last thing I want to show about these generic inquiries is the move away from generic inquiries as inquiring about data and turning them into the platform from which users can do 80 or 90% of their work. And for that, I'm going to go over to one that's actually in use. And what I'm showing you here is a project list from a live customer. And what you can see is I have my primary list for projects here, but what I've added is a number of side panels. And we also have actions and we have mass update fields. So I'm going to show you how that works. But the reason you want to do this is now as a user, I can go to where my primary function is. And I can simply select the side panel, and let's maybe half side panel it so you can see a little bit more. So I can load up, and this is the actual screen. So if I click on this, it's going to open up the project. If I click on appointments, or in this case, let's look at the project summary. So all I'm doing is adding the most key reports, the most key functional forms to this list. Now, when I click on one of these, my side panel changes. This is key, and if you're not using these and you're not leveraging them in all of the primary sections of the application, you're not getting the most out of Acumatica's capabilities. So now let's go back and look at how those are constructed. So without getting into super amounts of detail, if we look at the entry point tab on any particular GI, with or without an entry screen, you can enable mass actions for records. I'm sorry, no, with an entry screen, you can enable mass actions for records. The reason this is important is the entry screen maps to the where the code lies that will actually perform the updates. So let's find maybe the sales orders. That's a better one. Okay, so this is the primary list for sales orders. So if I look at my entry point, what you'll see is it's been mapped to replace the sales order screen. And all that means is on the navigation, it's pointing the sales order link to the generic inquiry instead of directly at the sales order screen. And you can see that we've enabled mass actions, we've enabled mass record update, and we've enabled new record creation. New record creation means that you can just hit the plus and make a new one. Mass record update means right here, I have an update, and what that does is brings up what fields are allowed to be, and maybe we didn't actually map any. Oh, good, so we get to map one. So that probably means, oh no, we do have some. Interesting. So we'll go over here. Maybe we need to refresh that. And Let's just clear everything out, clear the filter. And let's go ahead and say, oh, sorry. When you update a record, you actually have to pick what record you're updating or it ignores you, which is something I did not do just now. So I've selected records. When you hit mass update or mass delete, you have these checkboxes, and you're going to then be able to take whatever fields you mapped and whatever you've selected, and I hit finish. I know this one's actually going to say it failed even though it didn't. Um, and that's because, actually, no, these won't fail because they say they're on hold. So now if I refresh this, while that's running, that's actually running in the background, but we're going to take a look. It's still running. Okay. So now I've updated these two records with, this is a new value, right? And I can tell you that if these were not on hold, it would actually fail, saying that the save button wasn't enabled, even though it actually saves them because the notes are always available. Okay, so we've looked at the mass update fields. What about this idea of navigation? So the navigation, you can see side panel, you can see side panel, side panel, side panel. Those are represented by all of these things here. So if I want to click on my customer, I can see it will open up a customer. If I want to look at the sales order, or if I want to look at a printed form. So all of the actions, or the 80 or 90% of actions you're going to take on any given sales order or any given invoice or project, by putting all of these things into one place, I now have given the users a single place that they can do a greater majority of their work without leaving. So they can use the filters, find things, perform actions without ever leaving. And as you can see, I'm going through lots of tabs, and people are, pretty accustomed, especially if you've been around, accustomed to having, 75 tabs open. This eliminates some of that bouncing back and forth and refreshing. You're doing everything in one place. So this is clearly a local environment, and our customer screen is taking a while. Well, it'll wake up eventually. So if we go back to the generic inquiry, how do we do that? We simply say, I want to see the side panel, and I'm going to call this a side panel, and then I'm going to pick a screen that I can map to something that is on that grid, whether it's visible or not. So for example, I might have my shipments. I might want to look at my shipment screen, and I don't want to look at, I might want to look at my list and filter it. I might want to look at a particular transaction. With this one, it would be tricky because you might have multiple shipments and you have one record per sales order, but you get the idea, is to be able to find the important screens without leaving a particular primary list. So in this one, we've got our sales order, our blanket sales order. We've got actually the sales order, and then we've got the sales order printed report. We've got the blanket sales order printed report. We've got the quote, sales order status dashboard, and then our return documents. So all of this is in one place. And so when I come back here, I can see all of those things right here. Related returns, any receivables. This probably doesn't have receivables because it does not have, it's on hold. I don't think it's actually run through, but we could refresh this. We're still sitting on the view of having processed something. One thing you'll note is when you do a mass update, mass action, is you do have to refresh the screen because it behaves like a processing screen. So those are some of the really key pieces to working in GIs and making GIs sort of a singular home for users, color coding things, whether it be lines or even better, very specific pieces of information that you call out so that visually a user doesn't have to figure it out. The less figuring out, the more people are actually working on stuff, right? So that would be a lot of tips on making the GIs work a lot better for you. And from there, what I wanted to do was talk about and shift over to some nuances with the report designer. And one of the things that I start with when I have to do reports on any project is um, I go ahead and I find one of the reports I need to work on. Let's go find a report. All right, so let's go look at this report. This looks to be the sales order report. And before I even get started, I'm going to go ahead and edit the report. And I'm just going to show you how I go about it. Hello. Give it a moment. Try that one more time. So I'm going to hit edit report, see if that is more cooperative, and it is. So, and we're going to use our complicated password, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so the first thing I do is not edit any particular singular report, but go find, and we'll just scoot this on over, I go find my style sheet. So, and before you get there, yes, I know that we have pink and we have blue, but you'll see that in a moment. So the very first thing I do is I click up here in this little box at the top left, and that highlights the properties of the entire report. From there, I jump on and find what is my styles template. Now, this is where you want to make the changes to colors, to fonts, to formats, not layout, but everything else. And this is why. This is sort of the I guess the Lord of the Rings style of managing how things look. One style to rule them all. Okay, so that document is in reference to another report. Now, this is a really kind of bland looking report until you open up the style sheet here, and that's where we find that all of those names, and we look over here. Let's side by side them so you can see. That's where you find all the named formats. Let's just open that up. Okay. So if I look at this, I can see that it's using a style name. Well, where did that name come from? Well, that name came from the template, and the template is just another report, which is sort of the driving factor for how things are formatted as like a global. And so one of the very first things I do is I make it a report itself. So I come over here and I find some report. Usually you can find just by looking for anything that contains RPX. And you'll find that we have all these. This is the sitemap, and it shows you all the different reports in the system. Well, I made my own report, and it starts with RP. And it starts with RP, and it's just the external report style sheet. And so what did I do? I then went over and made sure that, I put it in system management in reports. So then I went over here, and if we look up system management, external report style sheet. So what external report style sheet means is it's external facing, vendors, customers, typically the forms. There are actually a few of them, and I encourage you to look at your different reports, your out of the box reports, and just check it out, because that's what's driving that sky blue, that particular font. Now, by doing that, I've now put it into my sitemap. And I have given, let's see, my external report style sheet, I have given access to my administrator. In fact, I would probably, in retrospect, I guess if it's not just me doing it, I would probably go to my report designer and I would say, you know what, they probably need it too. And that would put it right here. Now, why is that important to me? Why is that important to me? Because every time, let's see, external. Because every time Acumatica upgrades, the core reports are, which are contained in the file system on the site, they're contained in a folder. And this is another really important thing to note. The difference between having a version and just saving without checking the box, and I'll show you right now. We'll go over to our, and this we're gonna save this. The difference between hitting save to server, and if I check the box, it's going to put it in the database, which means it carries with every database with every snapshot, and it more importantly, when you upgrade Acumatica, the file that is in the file system, well, the installer steamrolls right over it. And if you've gone through at least one upgrade or several upgrades, what you're going to find is, oh, the report changed. Oh, we lost all our changes. Well, that's because the files are being overwritten. What's not being overwritten are the versions. The versions are in the database. They persist. And it's actually very convenient because I can make comparisons. So what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to come over to my sales orders, and let's just pick my sales order and pick, I guess any sales order will do. Yeah, why not? We're going to run this report, and I'm going to look at what it looks like. Okay, so what I want to point out to you is I've made several changes. I changed everything to pink, but I also changed some fonts. Now, if I go over to my purchase order, and maybe we can side by side these two for a moment. No, not there. Here. Okay. So now we're going to open this up. You can kind of see the difference between Arial, and this is clearly a different named format than this, but you can see the difference between my Times New Roman, which has little tails, and you can see my Arial font. Okay. So now I'm going to side by side this. You know what? Let's just, it's my sales order. Okay, good. So I'm going to put my sales order here, and I'm going to go and grab my purchase order. I guess we should have a purchase order, just any old normal purchase order. And let's just pick this guy, the first one, and run him. And there we go. More of my pink. Now I'm going to side by side these. Get that down here. Okay. So one of the other huge benefits to what I'm doing is if I come over here and I look at that, so now I'm going to take the versions off, and you're going to recognize this simply by deactivating a particular style sheet. And now I'm going back to stock Acumatica. So now this is stock Acumatica, but what it also means is, and we get back to that one format to rule them all. I'm going to refresh these, and I am now back to stock. All Arial font, all light blue. And I will just burn through a couple of examples. Let's go to this one. As you can see, my naming conventions are awesome. We'll do that. And I believe this is still Arial, but I've managed to do all pink. And by making these changes, I am now making one change that persists across all of my forms. Now there's another one for my reports. There's another one. There's another one for different types of reports. There's actually, I think, 3 at this point, maybe 4. But by having this, A, I'm persisting it across all of my upgrades. B, I'm making singular changes that impact all of my reports rather than going through one at a time. The one at a time with this many reports is for the birds. If we look at the sitemap and get rid of this, how many reports are there? We'll just hit Excel really quick, and it's thinking. This is never a good sign when we're burning the circle this long, but let's take a look. How many reports are in Acumatica, meaning how many RPX files? So I'm just going to take a look at this out of the sitemap, and move this on over. So this is proof. I think the term is proof is in the pudding, and I'm just going to highlight all 399 RPX files. So, or 398 RPX files. Well, that's a lot of by hand, form by form editing that we don't want to do. Okay. I think we're probably getting close to time for Q&A, but there's one more thing I wanted to point out, and that is there's a lot of use of these SQL views because you need a sub report or whatnot. If you use the idea that a generic inquiry can feed another inquiry, a lot of your SQL view needs are going away. If you're doing it in the report writer, you've always had the capability, but you had to really think of how you were building your report, right? So when you're writing your SQL views, if you're one of those more savvy users, you would write a query and then you would have some sort of subselect. In the Acumatica report writer, how you would actually construct that is inversely. I would create a report, and let's just go back over to here, and let's look at this report. And what I'm going to do is show you that this report is actually the subselect, and we're going to go and open this up. This is the subselect. Get to that. Wrapping all of the other reports. So if we looked at that report, let's just take a look at that over here. If we look at this report, what you'll find is I took the subselect, what I'm used to building as the end of a query, and I wrapped all the other reports in it. And what does that mean? Let's just take a look. All of these are my subreports, and I've mapped an output from my subselect as the input to all of my reports. And what did that mean? That meant that this wrapper really just wanted to know what was my latest cost projection, and I just basically would do that subselect as a project to its cost projection, and then its cost projection to another cost projection, asking for the max and the second to highest max, basically max less than the other max. And that was it. All I needed to know was the project, the max project, or the max projection, and the last projection. So how does that manifest? This is, and let's just get into full screen now, make it a little bigger. Okay. So I just wanted to know this cost projection versus this cost projection, and that was my subselect. So I didn't need a view. Then each one of these were individual reports fed with my project and then 2 different revisions, so I could compare current month to previous month. So that's sort of how it goes. And by using some of these techniques, we're able to as you can see, not actually uh, select a particular cost projection because it had been predetermined by some conditions. Now, I of course added the capability to override that. If someone wanted to say first to last or halfway through the project, you still could. But by default, that subselect stands on its own and wraps all of my other reports. This being a WIP report versus the out of the box one, which isn't nearly as helpful as knowing all of the details and all of the specifics to every little piece, right? So, with that, I think it's probably time for a little Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Courtney to take over.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. There were so many good tidbits of information in there, and I'm sure we have some questions from the audience. I've seen a couple come through already. So if you have a question, now's the time. You can go ahead and get that in the Q&A section of your GoToWebinar panel, and we're going to dive into as many of these questions as we can fit in the next 14 minutes or so. So, Matthew, to kick it off, the first question I have for you is, if I already edited the formats on my reports without using the style templates, is there a way to reverse what I did and perform that the simple way?
Okay, yes. Um, there are two ways to go about it, and it depends on how hard you went after that report. If you have a couple of things moved, you're almost better off to print it out, just revert back to stock and go ahead and just perform those moves again. If if you ended up actually making a tremendous amount of change, the further you deviated from the from the stock report, uh, the more you're going to have to make a comparison and decide whether or not it's faster to go ahead and just highlight all of a particular um, row, like section. So you might highlight the entire column section and just basically blank out the styles and give it the name. And you can side by side them by hitting edit on the version that you have, and then unchecking the box, that active box, to go back to stock so that you have the editor in both. Now, when you have the editor both left and right side, you can copy from one report designer instance and then go to the other report designer instance, just delete that section and then paste in what you originally had. So sometimes it's easier to grab the existing or the stock one and just make those shifts. Maybe the columns are moved left and right. It really depends though, but there are multiple ways to do it. You have to assess which is going to be the least amount of work.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So, another question we had come through is, after an upgrade, one of my report versions broke. What do I do?
Okay, so um, from time to time, Acumatica is they're going to enhance the product, and as part of enhancing the product, the schema changes. You almost always, when the schema changes, some report is broken. Acumatica takes care of those reports if you're stock. If you've only modified your report designer templates, right? But if you've gone into the report and structurally changed it and versioned it, now at that point, what you end up having to do is make an assessment again. Is the what is the difference between the two? And in many cases, the report, the stock report, and the one that you customized, they aren't usually that far off. What I usually would recommend is to go back to stock with a copy of the report that you had, um, like a PDF, and just basically take a look at it and redo the change, um, given the stock report. Now, obviously, that isn't as practical on really, really heavily customized reports, but if you're someone doing heavy, heavy customizations of reports, odds are you have a better pulse on what needs to happen. And worst case scenario, you open the report and it blows up and you get a trace. If you dig into the traces, a lot of the time you can find, um, for example, employee between 22 and 24 somewhere, employee was moved from, I think, the CR objects to the EP objects. Um, and you end up realizing that you can go in to the editor and basically just change the name of the table and everything else stayed the same and then save it back. So it depending on the level of customization, it can get kind of hairy. And worst case scenario is you reach out to uh, your project manager or SWK, and it gets ticketed. You're not the only one upgrading. We frequently find that the same report is being uh, is being mutilated by an upgrade for umpteen customers, not just you. So sometimes it doesn't hurt to just throw it at us, and whether or not you have us do it, or we give you some direction. Either way, our goal is that um, you are up and operational the way you need to be as quickly as possible.
Perfect. Great to know. Another question we had come in is there a way in Acumatica to create a calendar for sales guys to keep track of their appointments?
You know,
Did I finally stump you with something?
no, there's a new. Okay, so the background behind the calendaring came out of field services, and it was a real weird overlay that had a lot of like JavaScript and things like that. I only know this out of chance because I know the developers. It came out of field services. There is actually a new calendar in beta for like scheduling and things like that. But my understanding is that they've been expanding on some things for the framework. I don't think it's live production until 25R1, but I think there's functionality that can be looked at in as like sort of beta in 24R2. That's something I would strongly recommend you reach out to whoever your rep is here, and we'll try and figure out what the roadmap is for that. The calendaring thing is something a little newer for the interface on XRP.
Perfect. That's good to know. Yeah, and like Matthew said, if that's you, definitely let your rep know, your team, project team, etc.
Yeah.
And we'll keep you updated about that kind of capability. And I'm sure that's something we'll cover down the line. We always, for those of you on here, we do always release blogs recapping all the details in the new releases for R1 and R2 of every year. So definitely make sure to keep an eye out for those because we do always, kind of condense and consolidate that information for you on those really big releases where there's a lot of detail to cover. So I think that might be our last question for today. I'm gonna give it a few more seconds in case we get a last minute submission there while we've got Matthew on to answer these questions.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah,
I'm here.
with that said, we would like to say thank you for taking some time out of your day. We hope you found this session informative and a lot of useful information. If you do think of a question after the fact, no worries. You can always reach us at info@swktech.com. Our website, like I mentioned, on our blog page and our resources tabs, there is a ton of information, different blogs about Acumatica, information on that latest release of R2 for 2024. And then we'd totally appreciate your participation in our closing survey. You can let us know if you thought of any other topics that you'd like us to cover, anything you want us to detail in Acumatica, anything of that nature. We would love to hear from you. So thank you all. Thank you, Matthew. That was a ton of great information, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.